The sky turned dark at exactly 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon. Not because of clouds or an eclipse, but because massive alien warships positioned themselves over every major city on Earth. They were enormous, each one the size of a small country, blocking out the sun with their metallic hulls that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Within minutes, every screen on the planet, televisions, phones, computers, even the electronic billboards in Times Square, flickered and displayed the same image. An alien commander stood before the camera, his armor covered in what looked like battle scars from 1,000 wars. His face was angular and harsh, with eyes that glowed a dull red. When he spoke, translation devices built into the broadcast made his words understandable in every language simultaneously. "People of Earth," the commander's voice boomed, cold and mechanical. "I am Supreme Commander Vexmol of the Karn Empire. Your planet has been selected for integration into our territory. You have 48 hours to surrender all governmental authority and military assets. Resistance will result in complete annihilation. This is not a negotiation. This is inevitability." The broadcast ended as abruptly as it began, leaving humanity in chaos. World leaders scrambled to emergency meetings. Military bases went on high alert, even though everyone knew their weapons would be useless against technology this advanced. Scientists worked frantically to analyze the alien ships, hoping to find some weakness. Civilians emptied grocery stores and huddled with their families, wondering if these were humanity's final days. But in a small town in Ohio, far from the panic of major cities, Margaret Reynolds was having a completely different kind of day. She pulled into the parking lot of Riverside Elementary School at 6:30 a.m., just like she had for the past 22 years. Margaret was 63 years old. With gray hair she kept in a practical bun and hands that showed the wear of decades spent cooking. She wore her usual uniform: comfortable shoes, simple pants, and a floral apron that had somehow survived countless washes. The school cafeteria was her domain and she took pride in it. While other schools served frozen prepackaged meals, Margaret insisted on cooking from scratch. Today's menu was special: her legendary mac and cheese. Not the powdered box kind or even the standard cafeteria recipe. This was her own creation, perfected over years of experimentation. 4 different cheeses melted together with cream, a touch of mustard for depth, and a secret blend of seasonings she'd never written down because it was all done by feel and experience. By 9 a.m. she had 3 enormous trays in the oven, the cheese bubbling and turning golden brown on top. The smell filled the entire school, making teachers and students alike check their watches, counting down the minutes until lunch. Margaret also prepared green beans with real butter, fresh dinner rolls, and apple slices with caramel dip she'd made herself that morning. Around 10:30, during her break, Margaret walked into the teacher's lounge to grab her coffee. The TV was on and a group of teachers stood frozen, staring at the screen. The news showed the alien ships, military analysts discussing defensive options, and panicked crowds in major cities. The morning invasion broadcast was being replayed over and over, with experts debating what humanity should do. Margaret watched for a few minutes, shaking her head slowly. "Well, would you look at that," she said, more to herself than anyone else. "Those creatures look absolutely miserable. I bet they haven't had a decent home-cooked meal in their entire lives. Probably eating nothing but that processed space food or whatever they have up there." One of the younger teachers, Beth, stared at her in disbelief. "Margaret, they're threatening to destroy the planet." "Oh, I heard them," Margaret replied, pouring her coffee. "But in my experience, people who go around being that aggressive are usually hungry, tired, or feeling unappreciated. Sometimes all 3. My late husband used to get grumpy just like that before dinner." She stirred cream into her coffee. "Anyway, I've got lunch service in an hour. Those kids need to eat regardless of what's happening up there in space." She returned to her kitchen, leaving the shocked teachers behind. Margaret had lived through enough to know that panicking never helped anything. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, she'd been a young girl watching her mother calmly continue cooking dinner while her father listened to the radio. When the 2008 financial crisis hit and she'd lost half her retirement savings, she kept showing up to work, kept feeding children. This was no different in her mind. Whatever happened would happen, but in the meantime people still needed to eat. Lunch service went as usual. Children lined up with their trays, and Margaret served each one with a smile and a generous portion. "There you go, sweetie. Make sure you eat those green beans too." Some kids mentioned the aliens, their voices nervous and excited. Margaret reassured them the same way she'd reassured her own 3 children through countless childhood fears. "The grown-ups are handling it, honey. You just focus on eating your lunch and doing well in school. That evening, after cleaning the kitchen and prepping ingredients for tomorrow, Margaret drove home to her small farmhouse on the edge of town. The property had been in her family for 3 generations, 15 acres with a vegetable garden, some old apple trees and woods surrounding the back portion. Her husband had passed away 5 years ago, and her children had moved to different states for work, so she lived alone now. But she kept busy with her garden, her cooking, and occasional visits from grandchildren. She was washing dishes around 8 p.m. when she heard a tremendous crash from the woods behind her house. The windows rattled and her cats scattered in panic. Margaret grabbed the flashlight she kept by the back door and stepped onto her porch. In the distance, through the trees, she could see a faint glow and smoke rising into the darkening sky. Against her better judgment, but driven by the same instinct that had made her a caretaker her whole life, Margaret walked toward the crash site. As she got closer, she could see it was some kind of small spacecraft about the size of a school bus, embedded in the ground with one wing crumpled. The metal was still hot, hissing where it touched the damp earth. Then she saw him. An alien soldier, crawling away from the wreckage, leaving a trail of dark blue liquid that she assumed was blood. He was wearing damaged armor and seemed disoriented, stumbling toward her house as if drawn by the lights. Margaret's first instinct wasn't fear, it was the same instinct she'd felt thousands of times seeing a hurt child in the cafeteria. Someone needed help. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she muttered, hurrying forward. Hold on. Let me help you before you collapse completely." The alien, later she'd learn his name was Dexval, was too weak to resist as this small human woman somehow got his arm over her shoulder and half-dragged, half-guided him toward her house. He was heavy, much heavier than a human his size would be, but Margaret had spent decades lifting industrial cooking pots and bags of flour. She was stronger than she looked. She got him into her kitchen and into a chair, where he slumped forward, his breathing ragged. His armor was cracked in several places, and that blue blood was seeping through. Margaret had no idea about alien biology, but she knew basic first aid. She grabbed her medical kit and started cleaning the wounds with antiseptic, then wrapped them in clean bandages. The alien watched her with confused eyes, as if he couldn't understand why she was helping him. "There now," Margaret said, finishing the last bandage. "I'm not a doctor, but that should hold until you heal up or your people find you or whatever happens next." She washed her hands and looked at him properly. Despite the armor and the alien features, he looked exhausted and hungry. "When's the last time you ate something?" The alien stared at her, not answering. Margaret shook her head. "That's what I thought. You just sit right there." She went to her refrigerator and pulled out the container of leftover mac and cheese from her test batch that morning. She scooped a generous portion into a bowl, added some of the green beans and heated everything in the microwave. She set the bowl in front of him with a fork, a napkin and a glass of sweet tea. "Go on," she encouraged. You look like you need it." Dexval had eaten military rations his entire life. Flavorless nutrient paste designed for maximum efficiency, minimum waste. He'd never considered that food could be anything else. But he was weak from the crash and this human seemed insistent. He picked up the fork awkwardly and took a small bite. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. His eyes widened. The combination of creamy cheese, perfectly cooked pasta, the subtle seasonings, it was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. It wasn't just taste, though that alone was revolutionary. It was the texture, the warmth, the way the flavors worked together. He took another bite, then another, eating faster. Margaret watched with satisfaction. "Slow down, honey, or you'll give yourself a stomachache. There's plenty more if you want seconds." Dexval finished the entire bowl, then accepted a second helping. And a third. He ate in complete silence, processing not just the food but what it represented. Someone had spent time creating this. Had chosen ingredients carefully, combined them with skill, heated them to the perfect temperature. And then had given it to him, a stranger, an invader, without asking for anything in return. When he finally finished, he looked at Margaret with something new in his expression. Something that might have been gratitude or wonder or confusion. Possibly all three. "Why?" he managed to ask in heavily accented English. Margaret was putting the leftovers away. "Why what, dear? Why help me? Why feed me?" She turned and looked at him like he'd asked why the sky was blue. "Because you needed help and I could provide it. That's what people do." She dried her hands on a towel. "Now, I'm assuming you'll want to get back to your ship or your people or whatever. Can you walk or do you need to rest here tonight?" Dexval stood slowly, testing his legs. The food had helped more than he would have thought possible. He felt stronger, clearer. "I can manage. Thank you." As he moved toward the door, Margaret called after him. You tell your commander that if he's planning on destroying our planet, he ought to at least try the local food first. Might change his perspective. The alien warrior paused at the door, looking back at this strange human female who had shown him more kindness in 1 hour than he'd received in his entire military career. Then he disappeared into the night, heading back toward his damaged ship. Margaret locked her door, checked on her cats and went to bed. She had to be up early tomorrow. Wednesday was chicken and dumplings day, and that recipe took time to prepare properly. Dexval managed to repair his scout ship enough to limp back to the main Karn fleet orbiting Earth. The entire flight back, he couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. His wounds were bandaged by enemy hands. He'd been fed by someone who had every reason to fear or hate him. And that food, he had no words in his own language to describe what he'd experienced. When he docked in the massive flagship's hangar bay, other warriors stared at him. His armor was damaged, covered in dirt, and he was carrying himself differently. There was something in his expression that didn't belong on a Karn soldier's face. Something almost like contentment. Protocol demanded he report to his immediate superior, but Dexval did something unprecedented. He requested an emergency audience with Supreme Commander Vexmol himself, citing critical intelligence regarding Earth's defensive capabilities. Such a request from a low-ranking scout was highly irregular, but the urgency in his transmission got him through. Vexmol received him in the command center, a circular room filled with tactical displays and battle readiness reports. The Supreme Commander stood 7 feet tall, his armor decorated with symbols of countless victories. He'd spent 300 years conquering planets, and Earth was supposed to be a simple addition to that list. "Speak quickly, Scout," Vexmol commanded. "What intelligence justifies this breach of protocol?" Dexval struggled to find the words. "Commander, the humans possess something we don't understand. A substance, no, an experience. It's delivered through consumption, but it affects more than just physical nutrition. It creates sensations of well-being, satisfaction, even emotional responses I cannot properly categorize." The other officers in the room exchanged glances. Vexmol's eyes narrowed. "You're suggesting Earth has developed some form of chemical warfare? A mind-altering weapon delivered through ingestion?" "I don't believe it's a weapon, sir. At least not intentionally. But its effects are powerful." The human who administered it showed no hostility, only what she called hospitality. "I've analyzed my own biological responses, and there's no evidence of toxins or control substances. Yet the experience was profound enough to warrant investigation." Vexmol considered this. The Karn had encountered many unusual defensive measures across the galaxy, but this was new. "Could this substance be weaponized against our forces?" "Unknown, sir. But I believe we should obtain samples for analysis. If the humans can create experiences this affecting through simple consumption, it could represent either a threat or a resource worth studying." The commander made his decision. "Return to the source. Acquire multiple samples of this substance. Determine if it poses a strategic threat. You have authorization to offer minor technological exchanges if necessary to maintain the humans' cooperation." Dexval saluted and left, but as he prepared for his return trip, he felt something unfamiliar. Anticipation. He was actually looking forward to seeing that kitchen again, to tasting more of whatever Margaret might prepare. This feeling troubled him. Karn warriors didn't look forward to things. They simply executed their duties. Meanwhile, back at her farmhouse, Margaret was having a quiet morning. It was Saturday, so no school, which meant she could focus on her garden and prepare some meals to freeze for the coming week. She was kneading dough for homemade bread when she heard a knock at her door. She wasn't particularly surprised to see the alien standing on her porch. "Well, hello again. I see you got your ship working. Come on in, but wipe your feet first." Dexval entered, and this time he was able to properly observe his surroundings. The kitchen was modest but well organized. Copper pots hung from hooks, herbs dried on a rack near the window, and the counters showed the wear of decades of use. Everything was clean but lived in, functional but personal. "I have been authorized to request more samples of the substance you provided," Dexval said formally. "In exchange, I can offer Karn technological data on sustainable energy generation or water purification systems." Margaret stopped kneading and looked at him with amusement. "Honey, you're talking about my cooking like it's some kind of science experiment? But sure, I'll feed you again. Not for your technology though, I wouldn't know what to do with that anyway. I'll feed you because that's what decent people do." She gestured to the table. "Sit down. I've got beef stew simmering, and the bread will be ready in about 40 minutes. As Dexval sat, Margaret continued working. She talked while she cooked, explaining what she was doing in simple terms. How the yeast made the bread rise. Why she added wine to the stew. The importance of tasting and adjusting seasonings rather than just following a recipe blindly. Cooking is part science, part art, and part love, she explained, shaping the dough into loaves. You can follow a recipe exactly and still make terrible food if you're not paying attention or don't care about the result. But if you put thought into it, consider who you're feeding and what they might need, the food turns out better somehow. Dexval absorbed every word. We have no equivalent concept in Karn culture. Food is simply fuel. We consume standardized nutrients in paste form. Individual preparation of meals would be inefficient. Margaret actually laughed at that. Inefficient? Maybe. But life isn't just about efficiency, dear. It's about the little things that make existence worthwhile. The smell of bread baking. The satisfaction of feeding someone who's hungry. The comfort of familiar flavors when you're having a hard day. She slid the bread pans into the oven. You can't measure those things on a spreadsheet, but they matter. When the stew was ready, she served him a generous bowl with thick slices of buttered bread still warm from the oven. Dexval ate slowly this time, trying to identify and understand each component. The tender beef that fell apart at the touch of his fork. The vegetables that had absorbed the rich broth. The bread's crusty exterior giving way to soft interior. This is extraordinary, he said quietly. This is just Saturday lunch, Margaret corrected with a smile. Nothing fancy. Though I am pretty proud of my bread recipe. Took me years to get it just right. What Dexval didn't immediately tell Margaret was that he'd been transmitting everything back to his ship. The conversation, the cooking process, even chemical analyses of the food. It was meant to be purely for intelligence gathering, but something unexpected happened. Other Karn warriors monitoring the transmission became curious. Dexval's vital signs showed unusual patterns. Elevated satisfaction hormones, reduced stress markers, increased cognitive engagement. The food's chemical composition was remarkable but not obviously dangerous. And there was something about watching the human work, listening to her explain her process with such care, that fascinated them. Within hours, word spread through the fleet in unofficial channels. Warriors whispered about the substance that made Dexval behave so strangely. Some dismissed it as a contamination risk. Others wondered if it might be worth investigating personally. By the third day, Dexval wasn't alone when he visited Margaret. 2 other scouts came with him, officially to verify the initial findings. Margaret took it in stride, simply setting 3 places at her table instead of 1. She'd made chicken and dumplings one of her specialties. The 2 new Karn warriors, Tokmar and Ralven, approached the meal with military caution. They analyzed it with handheld devices, checking for toxins and chemical weapons. Margaret watched with patient amusement, hands on her hips. Are you boys done playing with your gadgets? Food's better when it's hot. They ate cautiously at first, then with growing enthusiasm. Tokmar actually made a sound that might have been pleasure, then looked embarrassed that he'd done so. Ralven ate 3 helpings and asked detailed questions about the preparation process. This pattern continued and accelerated. More warriors found excuses to visit Earth, specifically Margaret's farmhouse. They came in pairs then small groups. Margaret expanded her cooking operation, setting up serving stations in her backyard like a church potluck. She treated each alien warrior exactly the same way she treated students in the cafeteria line, with firm kindness and insistence on basic manners. You say please when you want something and thank you when you receive it, she instructed a massive warrior who'd conquered 17 planets. He stammered out a please, like a scolded child. The Karn warriors formed orderly lines, waiting patiently for their turn. They began to compete over who could demonstrate better manners, seeing it as a challenge worthy of their warrior culture. Some started bringing containers, asking if they could take portions back to their ships to share with their units. Earth's governments finally noticed what was happening. Satellite surveillance showed dozens of alien soldiers gathering peacefully at a farmhouse in rural Ohio. Military intelligence couldn't make sense of it. Was this some kind of tactical staging area? Infiltration strategy? They sent agents to investigate. Federal personnel in dark suits arrived at Margaret's property, flashing badges and demanding to know what was happening. Margaret was in the middle of serving meatloaf to a line of alien warriors. What's happening is I'm feeding folks who are hungry, she told the agents simply. Same thing I've done for 22 years just with a different crowd. Now either get in line if you want some food, or stop blocking my driveway. The agents tried to explain that this was a matter of national security, that she was fraternizing with hostile forces, that there were protocols. Margaret cut them off. These boys haven't shown any hostility since they started eating properly. Maybe you government folks should try feeding people instead of just pointing weapons at them. Now excuse me, I've got work to do. The agents reported back that the situation was under control but highly unusual. Psychologists were brought in to analyze whether Margaret was under some form of mind control. She passed every test, showing no signs of manipulation, just a stubborn insistence on basic human decency. Meanwhile, aboard the flagship, Supreme Commander Vexmol was receiving troubling reports. Fleet discipline was degrading. Warriors were making unauthorized trips to Earth's surface. They were using words like delicious and satisfying in official communications. Some had even started criticizing the quality of their standard rations, something that had never happened in Karn military history. He reviewed the surveillance data himself, watching footage of his elite warriors standing in line at a farmhouse, politely waiting for portions of something called lasagna. The sight was absurd. Unacceptable. This human female was somehow undermining military cohesion without firing a single shot. Vexmol made a decision. He would go to Earth himself, confront this human, and put an end to whatever strange influence she was exerting over his forces. He would destroy the source of this corruption and restore proper Karn discipline. He had no idea that this decision would change not just his own life, but the entire future of the Karn Empire. Supreme Commander Vexmol descended to Earth on a cold Thursday morning, his personal shuttle escorted by 6 heavily armed gunships. He wasn't taking chances. Whatever mind control or chemical weapon this human possessed, he would end it today. 300 years of military command had taught him that problems needed to be eliminated swiftly and decisively. His intelligence reports indicated the human would be at the elementary school during morning hours. But when his forces arrived at Riverside Elementary, they found the building evacuated. Human authorities had cleared the area, expecting a confrontation. Vexmol's sensors quickly located Margaret's heat signature at her farmhouse instead. The commander's shuttle landed in the field beside Margaret's property with enough force to crack the frozen ground. His personal guard filed out first, weapons ready, scanning for threats. Then Vexmol himself emerged, his massive armored form gleaming in the winter sunlight. He stood nearly 8 feet tall in his ceremonial battle armor, every inch of it marked with victories from countless campaigns. Margaret was in her kitchen, visible through the window. She'd called in sick to work for the first time in 6 years, having seen the news reports about incoming Karn command ships. She figured if the aliens were going to make a move, they'd come to her, so she might as well be prepared. She'd spent the morning cooking, not out of fear but because it was what she did when she needed to think clearly. Vexmol strode toward the farmhouse, his guards flanking him. Before he could reach the door, it opened. Margaret stood there in her floral apron, wooden spoon in hand, looking completely unimpressed by the display of military might on her lawn. "You must be the head boss," she said, giving him a quick up-and-down look. "Took you long enough to show up. Come inside, you're letting all the warm air out." Vexmol stopped, genuinely surprised. Every species he'd ever conquered had shown fear when he appeared. Leaders begged for mercy. Warriors prepared for futile last stands. But this small human female just looked annoyed about her heating bill. "I am Supreme Commander Vexmol of the Karn Empire," he announced, his voice amplified by his armor speakers. "You have corrupted my warriors with your chemical weapons. This ends now." Margaret sighed. "First of all, stop yelling, I'm not deaf. Second, the only chemicals in my kitchen are salt, pepper, and baking soda. And third, if you're going to threaten me, at least come inside where it's warm. I don't heat the whole outdoors." She turned and walked back into her kitchen, leaving the door open. Vexmol stood there, confused. His guards looked to him for orders. Was this a trap? Some kind of psychological tactic? "Sir, we should proceed with caution," one guard suggested. But Vexmol's pride wouldn't allow him to appear hesitant. He ducked through the doorway, his armor barely fitting through the frame, and entered the modest farmhouse kitchen. His guards tried to follow, but Margaret held up her wooden spoon like a weapon. "Ah, just him. I don't have room for a whole platoon in my kitchen. You boys wait outside." To everyone's shock, Vexmol gestured for his guards to comply. They retreated reluctantly, leaving their commander alone with the human. Inside, Vexmol's helmet scanned the room for threats. He found none, just cooking equipment, ingredients, and several large pots simmering on the stove. "Now then," Margaret said, returning to her work. "You look half-starved and completely exhausted. When's the last time you had a proper meal?" "I consume nutrient paste twice daily according to optimal caloric intake schedules," Vexmol replied stiffly. "That's not what I asked. I asked when you last had a proper meal." Something made with care, with actual flavor and texture. She stirred one of her pots, releasing a rich aroma that filled the kitchen. I'm guessing never, based on that answer. Vexmol's armor filtered air, but some of the scent got through. He'd never smelled anything like it before. His species had evolved to be efficient hunters and warriors, not gourmands. But something about that smell triggered responses in his brain he didn't understand. I did not come here to discuss food, he said, trying to regain control of the conversation. You have undermined military discipline among my forces. Dozens of warriors have been compromised by whatever substances you've administered. This constitutes an act of war. Margaret turned to face him fully, hands on her hips. Let me tell you something about your warriors. Every single one who's come through that door was hungry, not just in their stomachs but in their souls. They're living on paste and following orders and conquering planets, but nobody's actually taking care of them. Nobody's treating them like people who matter. We are warriors, not people, Vexmol corrected automatically. We are instruments of the Empire. See, that's your problem right there. Margaret pointed her spoon at him. You can be both. You can be warriors and still deserve kindness. Still need comfort. Still benefit from someone giving a damn about your well-being. Vexmol's armor hummed as his weapon systems powered up. You speak of weakness. The Karn eliminated such inefficiencies generations ago. And how's that working out for you? Margaret challenged. You've got warriors sneaking away from their posts to eat my casseroles. They're forming lines in my backyard like kids at recess. If your system worked so well, why are they so desperate for what I'm offering? The question struck deeper than Vexmol wanted to admit. He'd noticed the changes in his forces. The strange contentment. The decreased aggression. The unprecedented requests for leave time. It disturbed him because he had no framework to understand it. Enough, he said, raising his armored hand. Energy crackled around his weapons. I will eliminate this corruption at its source. Every warrior outside tensed, ready to storm the building. But before Vexmol could fire, Margaret stepped directly into his line of fire. Go ahead then, she said calmly. Destroy me. Blow up my kitchen. But that won't solve your problem. Your warriors have learned something you can't unlearn. That life can be more than just following orders. That someone caring about them feels good. You can kill me, but you can't kill that knowledge. Vexmol hesitated. In 300 years he'd never hesitated. Margaret continued. Or, we can do this differently. I'll make you a deal. I'll prepare a meal for you, my very best. You sit down and eat it like your warriors have. If you can honestly tell me afterward that it's nothing special, that it doesn't affect you at all, then I'll stop cooking. I'll send your warriors away. I'll let you invade Earth without interference. And if your food does affect me? Vexmol asked. Then you call off this invasion. You leave Earth alone. And maybe, just maybe, you think about whether conquering everything you see is really making your people happy. She met his glowing eyes without fear. Deal? It was absurd. A supreme commander of the Karn Empire, negotiating with an unarmed human civilian over food. But Vexmol found himself intrigued despite his better judgment. He'd conquered worlds through strategy and force. This was something entirely different. I accept your challenge, he said. But know that I have eaten with kings and emperors across the galaxy. I have perfect control over my physical responses. Your food will not affect me. We'll see about that, honey. Margaret smiled and pointed to her kitchen table. Now sit down and take off that ridiculous helmet. You can't taste properly with all that metal in the way. Vexmol actually complied, his armor hissing as he removed his helmet. His guards outside nearly panicked. Their commander never removed protective gear in potentially hostile territory. But Vexmol was confident. This was just food. He'd maintained perfect discipline through torture, deprivation, and psychological warfare. A simple meal couldn't possibly break him. Margaret studied his face properly for the first time. He looked tired, she thought. Ancient and tired. His skin had a gray tone and his eyes, without the helmet's glow, looked dull. This was someone who'd spent centuries living only for duty and conquest. Right then, she said, rolling up her sleeves. Let me show you what you've been missing. She didn't make her mac and cheese this time. That was comfort food, but this situation called for something more powerful. She made the meal she'd prepared for her own children during their hardest moments. When her son had lost his best friend. When her daughter's marriage fell apart. When her youngest couldn't find his path in life. Pot roast, slow cooked for hours until the meat fell apart at the touch of a fork. Roasted root vegetables, carrots, potatoes, parsnips, caramelized and sweet. Homemade rolls with butter she churned herself. And for dessert, Apple pie made with fruit from her own trees, the crust so flaky it practically melted. She worked while Vexmol watched, explaining nothing, just cooking with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this thousands of times. But there was more than efficiency in her movements. There was care in how she tasted and adjusted seasonings. Attention in how she monitored temperatures. Purpose in every action. When everything was ready, she plated it beautifully, not fancy restaurant style but home style, generous and welcoming. She set it before Vexmol with silverware, a cloth napkin and a glass of sweet tea. "There you go," she said simply. "Take your time. Food like this shouldn't be rushed." Vexmol looked down at the plate. Steam rose from the meat, carrying scents that made something deep in his brain respond with interest. He picked up the fork awkwardly. Karn typically consumed their paste through tubes, and cut into the roast. The first bite changed everything. It wasn't just the flavor, though that alone was overwhelming. The tender meat, the sweet vegetables, the buttery roll, each element was perfect individually and even better together. But what hit Vexmol hardest was the realization behind the food. Someone had spent hours making this. Had chosen each ingredient carefully. Had monitored and adjusted and cared about every detail. And she'd done it for him, a stranger who'd threatened her life minutes earlier. The food wasn't just sustenance. It was an act of generosity, of care, of treating him as someone whose well-being mattered. In 300 years of military service, no one had ever cared about Vexmol's well-being. He was the supreme commander. He gave orders, made decisions, bore responsibility. But no one had ever asked if he was tired or hungry or needed comfort. Until now. He ate slowly, trying to process what he was experiencing. The food filled his stomach, but it did something else too. It filled an emptiness he hadn't known existed. When he finished, Margaret set a slice of apple pie in front of him. "Dessert," she said. "Can't have a proper meal without it." Vexmol ate the pie. The combination of tart apples, sweet cinnamon, and buttery crust nearly undid him completely. When he'd finished every bite, he sat in silence for a long moment. "Well?" Margaret asked gently. "How do you feel?" Vexmol looked up at her, and for the first time in 3 centuries, the great warrior didn't know what to say. Vexmol sat at Margaret's kitchen table for nearly 4 hours. His guards outside grew increasingly concerned, sending urgent messages that went unanswered. Inside, the supreme commander of the Karn Empire was experiencing something he had no training for. He was having feelings he couldn't classify or control. "I don't understand what's happening," he finally admitted, his voice quieter than before. "My physiological responses are normal. No toxins detected. Yet I feel different." Margaret refilled his tea and sat down across from him. "What you're feeling is being cared for. It's what happens when someone takes time to consider your needs and does something about it without expecting anything in return." "But why would you do this?" Vexmol asked, genuinely confused. "I came here to destroy you. I've conquered 17 star systems. I've ordered the deaths of millions. Why would you feed me?" "Because you needed it," Margaret said simply. "And because everybody deserves kindness, even people who've made bad choices. My mama used to say that hurt people hurt people. You've spent 300 years being nothing but a weapon. Nobody's treated you like a person in all that time, have they?" The question hit harder than any weapon Vexmol had ever faced. When had someone last asked about his well-being? When had anyone cared if he was tired or lonely or struggling? He commanded respect through fear and authority, but nobody actually cared about him as an individual. "The Karn way is efficiency," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Personal comfort is irrelevant to our purpose." "And how's that working out?" Margaret asked gently. "You've conquered all these planets, built this huge empire. Are your people happy? Do they have anything to look forward to besides the next battle?" Vexmol had no answer. Happiness wasn't a metric the Karn measured. Success meant territory gained, resources acquired, enemies defeated. But sitting in this warm kitchen, feeling strangely content with a full stomach, he wondered for the first time if they'd been measuring the wrong things all along. He stood slowly, his massive frame seeming somehow less intimidating than before. "I need to think about this. I'm calling a temporary suspension of all invasion operations. My fleet will remain in orbit, but there will be no hostile actions while I investigate this further." Margaret smiled. "That's a good start. You're welcome back anytime. And bring whoever you want. I'll teach them too if they're interested." Vexmol left, his guards surrounding him immediately, checking him for injuries or signs of manipulation. He brushed them off, returned to his shuttle, and within the hour broadcast an unprecedented command to the entire Karn fleet. Invasion operations suspended indefinitely for cultural research purposes. The announcement sent shockwaves through both the Karn Empire and Earth's governments. Military analysts scrambled to understand what cultural research meant. Was it a trick? A new invasion strategy? But the Karn ships remained in orbit, weapons powered down, taking no aggressive actions. Within days, Vexmol established what he called a cultural exchange program. He wanted to understand this cooking concept more deeply. If something as simple as prepared food could affect him so profoundly, what else had the Karn eliminated that might be worth reconsidering? Margaret's farmhouse became an unofficial embassy. Earth's leaders tried repeatedly to take control of the situation, sending diplomats and military officials. But the Karn refused to negotiate with anyone except Margaret. They'd been served fancy state dinners prepared by professional chefs. Beautiful presentation, technically perfect, but soulless. They could taste the difference between food made for show and food made with genuine care. The lunch lady became the most important human on the planet almost overnight. News crews camped outside her property. World leaders called begging for meetings. She turned down interview requests from every major network and told the president she was too busy to visit Washington. "I've got cooking to do," she told them all. "These folks need feeding, and that's what I'm going to do." She started teaching Karn warriors how to cook, holding classes in her expanded outdoor kitchen area. The warriors approached it exactly as expected, like a military operation. They measured ingredients with scientific precision, timed everything with stopwatches, and followed recipes like battle plans. "You're missing the point," Margaret told a warrior named Takmar who was measuring flour to the exact gram. "Cooking isn't just following instructions. It's about feeling the dough, tasting as you go, adjusting based on instinct and experience. You can't do that with a stopwatch and a calculator." Takmar looked genuinely distressed. "But how do I know if I'm doing it correctly without precise measurements?" "You taste it, honey. You pay attention. You care about the result." She took his hand and had him feel the bread dough. "See? That's too dry. You need a bit more water. You can feel it's not right." This concept, trusting sensation and intuition rather than data, was revolutionary for the Karn. But slowly, painfully they began to learn. They made mistakes, burned things, oversalted dishes, created combinations that were genuinely terrible. But they kept trying and something strange started happening. A warrior named Ralven made soup for his squad mate who'd injured himself during training exercises. It wasn't great soup, too much salt, vegetables cut unevenly, but he'd made it specifically because his friend was hurting and needed comfort. The injured warrior ate every drop and thanked him with genuine emotion. Another warrior, Brexol, experimented with spices for weeks until he created a sauce his unit actually got excited about. They started requesting it specifically, and he felt a swell of pride that had nothing to do with military achievement. These small moments rippled outward. Warriors who'd learned to cook started talking differently. They asked each other how they were feeling. They noticed when squad mates seemed tired or stressed. They began treating each other as individuals worth caring about rather than interchangeable military units. The changes weren't limited to Earth. Warriors rotated back to the main fleet and brought their new knowledge with them. They started preparing food in their quarters, sharing it with others, teaching what they'd learned. Some commanders tried to stop it, seeing it as a dangerous distraction. But the practice spread anyway, passed quietly between warriors who discovered something that made their existence feel more meaningful. Vexmol watched all of this with a mixture of fascination and concern. His empire was changing in ways he couldn't control. Military efficiency was dropping as warriors spent time on food preparation. Discipline issues increased as soldiers began questioning orders that didn't make sense to them. Some warriors even refused certain missions, saying they didn't feel right. But he also noticed other changes. Suicide rates among Karn warriors had always been high, the result of lives spent in constant warfare with no emotional connection. Those rates dropped dramatically. Medical reports showed reduced stress hormones across the fleet. Warriors were healthier both physically and mentally. One evening, Vexmol returned to Margaret's kitchen alone. He'd been practicing cooking in his quarters, trying to understand it better. He'd made something he wanted her to try. Margaret tasted his attempt at stew. It was technically correct, proper cooking temperatures, appropriate ingredient ratios, but it lacked something essential. "It's not bad," she said diplomatically. "But it tastes like you were following a recipe instead of cooking for someone. Who are you making this for?" "For analytical purposes," Vexmol admitted. "To understand the process." "There's your problem. Cooking isn't an analytical exercise. It's an act of caring. Next time, think about a specific person. Consider what they might need or enjoy. Make it for them, not for data collection. Vexmol considered this. That seems inefficient. Why tailor food to individuals when a standard version would provide the same nutrients? Margaret smiled patiently. Because people aren't just machines that need fuel. They're individuals with preferences, memories, emotions. When you cook for someone specific, you're telling them they matter enough for you to put in extra effort. That's what makes the food taste better, it's seasoned with care. This conversation stayed with Vexmol. A week later, he prepared a meal specifically for his second-in-command, Commander Trelnock, who'd served with him for 70 years. He considered Trelnock's preferences based on decades of observation and made adjustments accordingly. Less spice, more herbs, denser bread. When Trelnock tasted it, he stopped eating and stared at his plate. "You made this for me specifically," he said, not asking but stating with wonder. "Yes," Vexmol confirmed. "In 70 years of service, you've never done anything specifically for me. Only for the mission, the Empire, the strategic objectives." Trelnock's voice caught. "This is the first time you've acknowledged me as an individual whose preferences matter." That moment crystallized something for Vexmol. The Karn hadn't just eliminated inefficiency when they'd structured their culture around pure military purpose. They'd eliminated recognition of individual worth. They'd turned people into tools. He called an emergency council of his senior commanders. "I'm proposing fundamental changes to Karn society," he announced. "We will maintain our military capabilities, but we will also reintroduce practices we eliminated generations ago. Starting with food preparation, but extending to other areas that acknowledge individual value." Many commanders objected. This was weakness, they argued. Inefficiency. A betrayal of everything the Karn Empire stood for. But others, particularly those who'd spent time on Earth learning to cook, supported the changes. They'd experienced firsthand what it felt like to be treated as individuals rather than units. They didn't want to go back. The Karn Empire stood at a crossroads, divided between those who clung to the old ways and those who discovered that life could be more than conquest and duty. And at the center of it all was a lunch lady from Ohio who'd simply insisted that everyone deserved a hot meal and basic kindness. The real test, however, was still coming. Not everyone in the Karn military was ready to accept these changes. And some were willing to fight to preserve the old ways, even if it meant civil war. 8 months after the Karn fleet first arrived at Earth, the transformation was remarkable. The massive warships that once threatened annihilation now had kitchens installed where weapons storage used to be. Warriors traded recipes over communication channels that previously carried only tactical data. Vexmol had officially renamed himself Chief Cultural Officer and established the Karn Culinary Institute, with Margaret as the honorary director. But not everyone was celebrating these changes. Deep in the outer regions of the Karn fleet, a group of traditionalist commanders watched with growing fury. They'd spent their entire lives believing in Karn supremacy, in the purity of military purpose, in conquest as the highest calling. Watching their empire go soft, over human food felt like a betrayal of everything they'd fought for. Admiral Kravox led this faction. He was Oldguard Karn, over 400 years old, with more battle victories than most warriors could count. He'd served under Vexmol's predecessor and remembered when the Karn were pure warriors, uncorrupted by sentiment or weakness. "This ends now," Kravox announced to his fellow traditionalists during a secret meeting. "We will restore the true Karn way. We start by eliminating the source of this infection, the human female who's poisoned our supreme commander's mind." They planned carefully. A strike force of 12 ships, all commanded by loyalists who rejected the new cultural changes. They'd wait until Vexmol was off-world at a diplomatic function, then attack Earth directly. Specifically, they'd target Margaret's farmhouse and everyone gathered there. The attack came on a Tuesday morning. Margaret was in her expanded outdoor kitchen area, teaching a class of 30 Karn warriors how to make lasagna. It was a complicated dish, requiring patience and attention to layers, and the warriors were struggling with the concept that more effort actually made food taste better. "You can't rush the bechamel sauce," Margaret was explaining to a warrior who tried to speed up the process with higher heat. "It needs low and slow, constant stirring or it'll." The warning sirens from the Karn ships in orbit cut her off. Then came the announcement from Tokmar, who'd been monitoring communications: incoming hostile craft. 12 ships breaking formation. They're heading directly for this location. The warriors in Margaret's class immediately shifted to combat mode, years of military training overriding their cooking lessons. But they faced a problem: they were armed only with spatulas and wooden spoons. Their weapons were back on their ships, in compliance with Margaret's strict, no guns in my kitchen rule. We need to evacuate you immediately, Ralven said, moving toward Margaret. They're coming to kill you. Like hell they are, Margaret said, her Midwestern stubbornness kicking in. I've got 30 pounds of lasagna to finish, and I'm not letting some cranky old warriors who can't accept change ruin my class. Margaret, this is serious, Tokmar insisted. These are hardened combat veterans. They'll level this entire area. Then I guess you boys better do something about it, Margaret said, returning to her sauce. You've spent 8 months learning that there's more to life than fighting. Now might be a good time to prove it. The warriors looked at each other, a silent communication passing between them. They'd learned to cook together, shared meals, talked about their feelings and dreams. They'd discovered they were more than weapons. They weren't going to let the old ways destroy what they'd found. Brexol made the first call to his ship, requesting immediate support. Then Ralven, then Tokmar. Within minutes, warriors across the fleet were making choices: side with the traditionalists and restore the old Karn way, or defend the new culture they'd begun to build. The battle began in orbit. Kravox's 12 ships opened fire on any vessel that moved to intercept them. But they hadn't anticipated the response. Hundreds of warriors who'd learned to cook, who'd experienced care and community, simultaneously refused orders from traditionalist commanders. Ships that were supposed to support Kravox instead moved to block his path to Earth. Stand down. Kravox commanded over open channels. You're betraying everything the Karn Empire stands for. No, came Trelnok's response. He'd taken command of a defense wing. We're fighting for what the Karn Empire could become. We're fighting for the right to be more than just weapons. The space battle was brief but intense. The traditionalists were skilled and experienced, but they were fighting warriors who had something worth protecting. For the first time in Karn history, soldiers weren't fighting for territory or resources. They were fighting for the right to care about each other, to have lives that meant something beyond conquest. 3 of Kravox's ships were disabled quickly. The rest pushed through, determined to complete their mission. They entered Earth's atmosphere with weapons charged, targeting systems locked on Margaret's farmhouse. On the ground, the warriors who'd been taking cooking class formed a defensive perimeter around Margaret. They had no weapons, no armor, but they stood their ground anyway. If the traditionalists wanted to kill the woman who'd taught them they mattered, they'd have to go through them first. The attack ships screamed overhead, weapons ports glowing. But before they could fire, something unexpected happened. Warriors from the defense fleet positioned their own ships between the attackers and the ground, using their vessels as shields. They were willing to take the hit meant for Margaret. Kravox, piloting the lead attack ship, hesitated. He'd expected resistance from corrupted warriors. But he hadn't expected them to sacrifice themselves. The Karn didn't do that. They fought strategically, preserved assets, avoided unnecessary losses. This kind of self-sacrifice for another individual went against every tactical principle they'd ever learned. Move aside, he commanded the blocking ships. This doesn't concern you. We're eliminating a threat to Karn purity. She's not a threat, came Dexval's response. He was piloting one of the blocking ships. She's the first person in my entire life who treated me like I mattered. I won't let you destroy that. Other voices joined in, warriors sharing similar stories. The human who'd fed them when they were hungry. Who'd listened to their problems. Who'd taught them that taking care of each other wasn't weakness, it was strength. Kravox felt his resolve waver. These weren't corrupted weaklings. These were warriors speaking with more conviction than he'd heard in centuries of military service. They weren't following orders, they were choosing to fight for something they believed in. Down on the ground, Margaret continued teaching her class, though her hands shook slightly. The key to good lasagna is the layers, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Each one matters. You can't skip steps or rush it. One of the younger warriors, Ventar, was watching the sky nervously. How can you stay calm? They're going to kill us. Maybe, Margaret admitted. But I've lived 63 years, raised 3 children, buried a husband I loved, and fed thousands of kids who needed someone to care about them. If I die today, at least it'll be doing what I believe in, showing people they're worth taking care of. She smiled at him. Besides, I have faith in your friends up there. They've learned well. Her confidence wasn't misplaced. In orbit, Vexmol had received word of the attack and was rushing back to Earth at maximum speed. But he wasn't needed. His warriors, the ones who'd learned to cook, who'd experienced community and care, had already won. Kravox made a decision that surprised even himself. Stand down, he ordered his remaining ships. Cease attack. His second-in-command protested. Admiral, we came here to eliminate the corruption. I know what we came for, Kravox snapped. But look at them. When's the last time you saw Karn warriors willing to die for something other than orders? When's the last time you heard such conviction in their voices? He paused. Maybe we're the ones who've been wrong. He brought his ship down, landing in Margaret's field. He exited slowly, hands visible and empty. The defensive warriors tensed, but Margaret walked forward to meet him. Kravox stood before her, this ancient warrior who'd conquered more worlds than most humans could imagine. And this small, elderly human woman in a floral apron looked him directly in the eye without fear. You came here to kill me, she said. It wasn't a question. I did, Kravox admitted. I believed you were destroying everything the Karn Empire stood for. And now I'm confused. I've watched warriors I've known for decades choose to sacrifice themselves for you. I've heard more passion in their voices defending you than I've heard in 400 years of military service. I need to understand why. Margaret studied him for a moment, then made a decision. Come inside. Let me make you something to eat and we'll talk about it. Kravox's officers tried to object, citing security concerns and tactical vulnerabilities. But the admiral silenced them. He'd come to destroy something he didn't understand. The least he could do was try to understand it first. Margaret brought him into her kitchen and made him the same meal she'd made for Vexmol, pot roast with roasted vegetables and homemade bread. As Kravox ate, she explained her philosophy simply. Life is hard, she said. Everyone's fighting battles you can't see. The least we can do is take care of each other in the small ways we can. Feed people who are hungry. Listen when they need to talk. Treat them like they matter because they do. Kravox ate in silence, processing flavors he'd never experienced and concepts he'd never considered. The food was extraordinary, but what affected him more was the realization that this human had made it for him. An enemy who'd come to kill her, simply because she believed everyone deserved care. When he finished, he sat quietly for a long moment. Then, for the first time in 400 years of life, Admiral Kravox cried. He didn't have tears like humans, but his shoulders shook and sounds came from deep in his chest. I've spent my entire existence serving an empire that never once asked if I was tired, he said. Never cared if I was lonely or scared or struggling. I was just a weapon to be used. And you, a being I came to kill, cared more about my well-being in 1 hour than my empire has in 4 centuries. Margaret patted his armored shoulder gently. Better late than never to figure that out, honey. In the weeks that followed, the Karn Empire completed its transformation. The attempted attack had forced everyone to choose sides, and the overwhelming majority chose the new way. Vexmol restructured everything, redirecting the Empire's purpose from conquest to cultural exploration and exchange. The Karn fleet left Earth's orbit, but not for invasion. They began traveling the galaxy as students instead of conquerors, learning the cuisines and cultures of every civilization they encountered. They traded their military might for knowledge, their weapons for cooking equipment. Margaret returned to work at Riverside Elementary, despite offers from universities, corporations, and governments. I'm a lunch lady, she insisted. That's what I'm good at, and that's what I'm going to keep doing. But her cafeteria was different now. Several Karn warriors rotated through as cultural exchange students, helping with lunch service and continuing their education. Human children ate alongside young Karn, sharing food and stories, learning that differences didn't have to mean conflict. One Tuesday, a year after it all began, Margaret was serving her famous mac and cheese to a mixed crowd of human and Karn children. A little human girl asked one of the young Karn about his home planet. The Karn child described it eagerly, then asked about her favorite foods. They traded lunches and laughed together over their different taste preferences. Margaret watched this interaction and smiled. She'd never set out to change the galaxy. She just insisted on basic human decency, that everyone deserved to be fed, to be cared for, to be treated like they mattered. Sometimes the most revolutionary act was simply being kind. As she served another helping of mac and cheese to an eager Karn student, she thought about how strange her life had become. But strange or not, she was doing what she'd always done, making sure nobody in her care went hungry. And in the end, that had been enough to change everything.